593-P, jury verdict. Count 1, murder in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 2, cruelty to children in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 3, murder in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 4, cruelty to children in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 5, involuntary manslaughter, unfaithful act. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 6, reckless conduct. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 7, involuntary manslaughter, unlawful act. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 8, reckless conduct. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 10, cruelty to children in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 11, cruelty to children in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 12, cruelty to children in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 13, cruelty to children in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 14, cruelty to children in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 15, cruelty to children in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 16, cruelty to children in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 17, cruelty to children in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 18, cruelty to children in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 19, cruelty to children in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 20, cruelty to children in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 22, cruelty to children in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 23, cruelty to children in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 24, cruelty to children in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 25, cruelty to children in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 26, cruelty to children in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 27, reckless conduct. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 28, reckless conduct. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 29, reckless conduct. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. This third day of March 2026, signed for Parsec.
Thank you, students. Counsel, do we need to...
Absolutely. All counts. Let's go over to the next video.
Breaking news out of Georgia. This has just happened in the last hour or so. The father of an alleged school shooter has been found guilty of second-degree murder and involuntary manslaughter. Colin Gray's son, Colt Gray, is accused of opening fire at Appalachia High School in 2024, killing 2 students and 2 teachers and injuring 9 others. His father was accused of providing his teenage son access to that firearm used to carry out the shooting. Well, this marks the second school shooting now where a parent has been held criminally responsible for their child's actions. You may remember in 2024, James and Jennifer Crumbley were both found guilty of involuntary manslaughter for a mass shooting committed by their son Ethan at Oxford High School. That was in Michigan. Let's bring in NBC's Aaron Gilchrist. He has been watching this verdict unfold. Aaron, tell us more.
Now, before we get into that, let me say something. I'm 100% fine with the parents being charged in something like this. Why? Because especially if they knew that their son had problems, they didn't enforce stopping the problems, and they basically enabled it to happen or just let it happen. They need to be charged with the crime. It makes sense to me. But let me know if you disagree with that, or if you think the parents shouldn't be charged because of what their kids are doing, especially in this kind of case. But let's keep going into this video.
Well, Savannah, you note that the fact that this is a parent who's being held responsible for the alleged crimes of his child, and this sort of takes it up another level because in the Crumbly case, we were talking about involuntary manslaughter. In this case, we're talking about second-degree murder charges. Colin Gray was found guilty on 2 counts of second-degree murder for the 2 students who were killed in that school shooting at Appalachia High School back in 2024. And this case is sort of unique because there were also charges of cruelty to children. And in order to convict on that second-degree murder charge, you had to convict on the cruelty to children charge in this case. And really the narrative that prosecutors used as the sort of umbrella narrative in their presentation over the course of 2 weeks and 60-plus witnesses was that because Colin Gray gave his son a weapon or gave him access to a weapon that he knew could be used to hurt people, and that he knew his son had exhibited signs over the years, warning signs, if you will, over the years that he could harm someone. In giving him the weapon, despite knowing that information, he was guilty of cruelty to children. There were, I think, 18 counts of cruelty to children, to include students, other students who were shot but not killed, to include students who were in the classroom where the shooting happened and traumatized by it. Many of them testified in the early days of this trial about the trauma that they experienced, about the injuries that they had. And so all those counts combined together really helped the prosecution to create a picture for this jury that it took them less than 2 hours to make a decision about. They were able to ask for, the jury actually asked to get the case last night. There were some technical things, some legal things that prevented that from happening. They got it just after 9 o'clock this morning. And again, in less than 2 hours, the jury came back with a verdict of guilty on all 27 charges that were against this father. And I think it's also worth pointing out, in this particular case, the prosecutors came out afterwards and said that it was really the multitude of warnings that this father got that the jury really zeroed in on and led them to the decision that they ultimately made today, Savannah.
100%. Now, remember, y'all, now, if you go back and look at some of the details of this case, the police gave him multiple warnings about his son, saying his son, he needs to watch his son, basically. In layman's terms, he needs to watch his son. And what did he do? Even though his son idolized a school shooter and thought about this kinds of stuff, he paid and bought for him a gun. Basically, like a sign to his son, I'm assuming, just to go wild. But the son, we're still waiting for the son to go to court now. So, but this is a crazy situation, y'all.
Maybe something we continue to see more of as a essentially second of its kind case convicts a parent. Aaron Gilchrist, thank you very much.
Hopefully more, yes. If parents are not responsible in how they raise their children, yes, more need to be charged. I believe that a big part of how a child turns out is how their parents raise them or how they instill rules and values into them. Now, is it 100% the case on the parents? No. A lot of it has to do with the child themselves. But parents play a big role. I would say probably 80 to 20. Now, let me know your thoughts. Let's go over into the AI breakdown just so we can get a little bit more information about this whole thing. So let's jump over into it. So on March 3rd, a jury found Colin Gray guilty on all charges related to the 2024 mass shooting at the Appalachia High School carried out by his son, Colt Gray. The jury in Georgia deliberated for less than 2 hours before coming back, convicting the 55-year-old of 27 counts, 2 counts of second-degree murder, 2 counts of involuntary manslaughter, 18 counts of second-degree cruelty to children, 5 counts of reckless conduct. So prosecution argued that Colin Gray was criminally responsible for the deaths of the students, both 14 years old, and the teachers. The key evidence during the 2 weeks trial included, so we had the providing a weapon. So Gray admitted to buying his son an AR-style rifle as a Christmas gift in 2023, despite being aware of the teens' mental health and previous FBI questioning regarding online threats. How do you do something as stupid as buying your kid a gun when he has made threats online and he has mental health issues? But this is why he is charged. So prosecutors highlighted that Gray knew his son was obsessed with the school shooters, and kept a shrine to the Parkland school shooter in his bedroom. Yeah, you got to go away. Gray's daughter testified against him, and Gray himself took the stand, claiming to had no idea his son was capable of such violence, intended the rifle for supervised hunting. You he had a shrine to a school shooter, but you didn't think he was capable of the violence? Okay, I mean, I guess every man is entitled to say how he feels. Colin Gray was escorted from the courtroom in handcuffs and will be sentenced at a later date. He faces the potential sentence of 10 to 30 years in prison for each second degree murder charge. So at the minimum, he has to get 20 years, and then 1 to 10 in prison for the involuntary manslaughter charges. So let's go back over into that. Where's the so he it's possible he gets 22 years for this. That's at the very minimum. Is that enough time? Let me know. The verdict marks the first time in Georgia history that a parent has been held criminally liable for a school shooting committed by their child. It follows a landmarking case in Michigan back in 2024. Now that goes to show, let me know your thoughts, y'all. Do you think a parent should be held liable for their children? You know how I feel, yes. Especially if they knew about the stuff that were happening and they just let it happen. You have to take some responsibility. You brought him into this world. You were supposed to guide him. You're responsible for him, especially if he's a child. But like, everybody's entitled to their opinion. Let me know your thoughts, y'all. Let me know if you disagree with anything I said. But he has been found guilty on all counts, and he will most likely spend the next 22 years in jail. All because he didn't stop his son. Crazy situation, y'all. Like I said, let me know your thoughts. We're going to pivot over into the last.